Uh, Welcome everyone, and thank you for your interest in learning more about the FAICP designation. My name is Mark Castiglione. I'm currently the chapter president for the Upstate chapter. The chapter really wanted to support additional nominations for the FAICP category and encourage more of our members to apply for the recognition. We feel that we have many more members who are deserving of the recognition than we currently have as designated FAICP members in our chapter. Of our chapter's 600 members, 38% of our members are AICP members, but only 1% of our chapter members are FAICP. And we know that there are many more than the 1% who are deserving of this recognition. So we hope to support those efforts through this work and this presentation and through the committee. Just a bit of housekeeping for today's presentation. The session is being recorded, so if you're distracted or you get bored or fall asleep during the presentation, you can always reference the recording afterwards. You'll be able to find it on the chapter's YouTube channel, and you'll be able to find a link on the chapter's FAICP resource page. We will be taking questions and answers. So if you want to put a question and answer or a question in the chat box or the Q&A box, you'll feel free to do so. We also have the power to unmute you. So sometimes asking a live question may be more helpful than typing it in a chat box. So if you'd like to ask a live question, you can put that in the Q&A box and we can unmute you so you can ask your question in person. I'd like to also thank the FAICP advisory committee, and you see the members here, and the majority of the committee are either panelists in this session or are participating as registrants of the session. First, I'd like to thank Richard Unger. I met Richard at the Rochester conference, I believe our last in-person conference. At that time, I was in the midst of writing 2 FAICP endorsement letters, a task I'd never wanted to do again by myself. So I saw Richard, I knew he was FAICP, and I said, hey, Richard, do you want to chair an FAICP committee? And he said, sure, why not? And here we are. I would say that the Upstate chapter has a number of committees, but this committee has worked over the course of the last year to put together a process to support FAICP nominations from our membership, has continued to work 100% virtually, remotely for the entire year, and really has been a working work group, which is what you hope to see. And I'd like to thank Richard for keeping everyone on track to make this progress in this committee and this presentation possible. I'd also like to specifically thank Molly Gaudioso. She is responsible for the presentation and herding a variety of the technological and resources that you'll see on the FAICP website. The members of this committee represent each section of our chapter in the hopes that we were able to spread the word and reach out to all of our members at the section level to encourage awareness about this effort. And our desire to encourage more of our members to apply for FAICP designation. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce the chairman of our committee, Richard Unger, to take us into the next phase of the presentation.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for all of you that are listening to this or will look at it down the road. And thank you for your interest in becoming an inductee into the College of Fellows. So I guess the first thing is, why seek induction into the AICP College of Fellows? Some simple reasons. You've worked hard to earn your education. You've all passed your AICP exam. You've committed to a career in helping communities. And, not the least, you deserve recognition for all those accomplishments. Simple as that. That's why. Okay, there's a lot of other reasons, but yes, it is, as it shows here on this slide, it is the highest honor that AICP bestows on any of its members. And as Mark touched upon, Percentage-wise, there are not a lot of FAICP members in our chapter or even across the country. It's a small group, so it is an honor. It is the highest honor, and it's granted for outstanding contributions to our profession, how you help your communities, the work you've done. It's reviewed by other planning experts and ones that have been there and done all this stuff, and they recognize great long-term work when they see it. However, I want to highlight one other thing. While FAICP is the highest honor, to me, it was an extreme honor just to be nominated by the chapter. And I think it's an honor just to be nominated by the chapter, or if you're nominated by a division, or if you're nominated by 10 other AICP members. That's the honor. That's the real honor, actually. They're your fellow chapter members. They're your planning associates. They're your clients. They're members of your community. They're leaders of your community. They're the ones you've worked closest with, and they're the ones that know you best. So that's why it's such an honor to be nominated. They know you. They know the value of your work. They know you best. They recognize your contributions, as I mentioned earlier, to your community and to your profession. That's the true honor, really. Okay. Then aside from the recognition you receive, there are some other benefits to being nominated and inducted. They have to do with, as it says there, a win for the team. And I'm use team in the broad sense. It adds you becoming inducted in the College of Fellows. It adds prestige to your community. Your supervisors, your boss, your mayors, your employer can use it to say, we've got a great planning team here. And becoming another part of the team is that it speaks well for the Upstate chapter, New York Upstate chapter. As Mark said, we have a low percentage compared to a lot of the other states. Some of these I happen to know, for example, Alabama is high, but it only takes a few members to kind of skew their percentage. We have a lot of members. We have a lot of qualified members, I am sure. So we are trying to encourage you to move this direction. Before I pass this off or pass it back to Mark, on the next slide, I want you to note the woman that's sixth from the left. I think I got that right. 1, 2, 3. Yes, the sixth one from the left. That's Celeste Warner. This is where I make the team broad. Celeste is in Mike and John's class of 2020. Many years ago, a colleague of mine, John McNamara, and I interviewed Celeste Warner when she was merely a recent graduate from Arizona State University in planning. 32 years later, she became, or approximately that, she became a fellow as well. So the benefits of this are to the chapter, to yourself, to your community, to your employees, but also if you've got mentors, if you have people that you've worked with through your career, if you become an FAICP, it's an honor for them. So I was so happy to see Celeste there. So, Mark? Mark there?
Thank you, Richard. Just building on Richard's point, you don't have to be a raging narcissist to apply for FAICP.
No.
The chapter's interest is also to raise the profile of professional planning in upstate New York, which also know is has a lot of room to be improved. So an FAICP does help us do that. FAICP started in 1998. In total, the members of the College of Fellows are heavily male. So certainly we want to encourage a more diversity candidate pool, particularly from our chapter. Of note, we currently have 0 women that have been recognized as FAICP for their work in upstate New York in our chapter. So we want to support a diversity of candidates that would go after this recognition. Of note, it's not a guarantee. if you submit your application for FAICP, only 60% of folks are accepted to the College of Fellows on their first try. The percentage of acceptance increases greatly if you want to make a second attempt at that. But just note, it's not a guarantee if you submit the nomination and your nomination is supported by the number of pathways there are for this. In our chapter, as I said, we have a number of FAICPs, and you see them here. Vijay Mittal, he was planner for the city of Auburn. Bob Shibley, he's chair and dean of the Department of Architecture and Planning at UB. Stuart Stein, famous planner in Tompkins County and professor at the Cornell University program. Richard Unger, he's our chair. And our two most recent in the chapter that were designated last year, Mike Long, primarily did work in Auburn and Poughkeepsie, and John Steinmetz, who cut his teeth in the Rochester area. And I will point out Molly Gaudioso was primarily responsible for pulling together John's application, and we hope to impart some of her knowledge on that process, given that it's so fresh in our minds. But we want to grow this slide. We want to add faces to this slide, and that's really why we wanted to create this committee to help out. So FAICP eligibility. 15 years as an AICP member in good standing. Basically, you just have to pay your dues and have 15 years as an AICP member. But I think giving careful consideration to being able to demonstrate your outstanding contribution to the profession over an extended period of time is the thing that will really define your likelihood of being designated an FAICP planner or welcomed into the College of Fellows. And getting to that process really requires a number of hoops to jump through, and I'll turn it over to Judy Bressler, who will talk about and dig into some of the specifics of that process. Judy?
Okay, thanks, Mark. I'm so glad we're doing this webinar for everybody, because I know as you're trying to get your arms around it, you don't know if you're eligible, you don't know what steps to take, and that's why we're here, as Mark said. But at the same time, you have to realize that not everybody is going to be eligible for FAICP. And as Mark said, you have to be a member in good standing. And when you're thinking about applying, ask yourself, how do I stand out from other planners? How do I designate myself as someone who's pretty special? And I know as a planner, you have a hard time doing that. Sometimes, politicians, they have no problem patting themselves on their back, but we as planners, we kind of sit in the background. We really have a difficult time promoting ourselves. So actually think about what are some of the crucial issues that you've worked on in your profession that has helped other people, and shine a light on yourself. Again, 15 years minimum. And it's kind of a difficult thing. We were saying earlier, 15 years minimum. If you go back, if you've been working as a planner for 30 years, sometimes some of the wonderful projects that you worked on 30 years ago, you don't have those people to reach out to. So kind of, it's sort of like there's many balls in the air. Look at who you can contact, because you're going to need letters of support. But think about what makes you stand out. Next slide.
So
yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Judy.
I was going to say the application requirements are going to be posted on our website. It's basically an outline of what you need to apply. The submittal of your application, it's up to you. The committee isn't going to write it for you, but we're going to be here to support you as much as we can. We want to make sure that what you're putting forward to us and goes on to the chapter board is a very strong application. So just be aware, it is a lot of work, but we do want to be here to give you a hand. Okay. Next slide.
So as sort of Judy talked about, this process and kind of the foreshadowing of it is it's a pretty in-depth application, even though at face value it might not look like it. And you kind of saw on the previous slide there, one of the things that as a chapter we've tried to do to help sort of bridge that level of effort is the Upstate Fellow Award application. It very closely mimics what is required as for the FAICP nomination. So obviously there's a lot of individuals outside of those 3 that have already received that designation who are also qualified and certainly worthy of this nomination. But just a couple things to highlight in terms of the application process are the nomination categories. So you can now pick more than one. Previously, you had to just sort of focus on one of these areas. But now you can choose from one of these 5 and select really as many as you think apply to you. The one thing we caution is that you are now putting yourself in a position where you really need to make the case for a significant number of things. And as Judy said, and as Mark said, it's about how, and as Rich said, about how, in depth or, and specific you can be about your contribution. So we really recommend that you just pick 1 or 2 as part of your initial application. Speaking personally, as Mark said, this is a big undertaking. Typically the timing, or historically the timing, has been the submission in odd number years. So this past was obviously in 2019, and then the induction actually happens in the even number years, 2020. The deadline this year for applications is bumped up, so we are a little more aggressive with the timeline to August 25th. So definitely not something I very much personally relate to this graphic here in terms of, procrastination, but this is really not something that you can put off. And that's really why we're here too, is to help you, move along in the development of your nomination package. One of the other things I wanted to bring up right at the front, because I hit this sort of halfway through the creation of John's application, there's some fine print at the end of the nomination guidelines. There's a great PDF. You can download it right from National's page. But here's some sort of specifics, 11-point font as a minimum, 1-inch margins, and they don't give you a budge on that. So I ended up having to really adapt and kind of change everything. And you'll see in a minute that everything is page limited. So certainly having all of that set up front is really important. They also require you to have separator pages. They really want you to avoid including images. So, at the start, I really was thinking, have all these great engaging images showing, John in action or all these other things. And they really don't want that. And they absolutely do not want you to include any picture of the nominee in the actual PDF. They also do not allow hyperlinks. So that great plan that you're referencing, they don't want the hyperlink to it to see it. The submittal now is all electronic. They want a single PDF. So all of the information I'm going to touch on in a second should be in one PDF. And it's not, they really don't want to see it as to be scanned in. And then they also want your headshot, which would be submitted separately. And, again, very down to the detail, they want that image labeled with the name of the nominee, obviously. So I recommend from the start, enlist help from your tech-savvy friends or, whoever. We obviously also can help with that respect, in piecing some of these things together and helping you have that quality application. They do say that they aren't looking at formatting or anything like that, but we all know that it does, help a little bit along the way. So these are your application requirements. So this is, like I said, at face value doesn't seem all that difficult, especially with the page limitations. How hard is a one-page narrative about an applicant? But you really need to, like we said, get very clear and to the point. And so you start out with your nomination form and checklist that's provided as part of the application from the National AICP. Then you need your endorsement letter. So that's where, in the case if you're seeking endorsement from the chapter, That's where we come in. We can help facilitate that. And Mark's going to touch on what we sort of expect or anticipate as part of that process. The narrative statement asks you, and this I thought was very interesting, to highlight just five key or what you think are the most important impacts that you've had as it relates to your nomination category. A 10-page annotated resume, and then they want letters of support. So that's at least 5, no more than 10, and each of those can only be 2 pages. You also have to include, as I'll touch on in a second, a summary of those authors. So they want some context on that. And then lastly, obviously for them, for promotional purposes and things, basically that brief statement, that 100-word piece, which I personally think is the easiest because I just took the narrative and cut that all down. But at the end of the day, to submit this, you submit a $95 fee. We want to be clear, that's not coming to us or to the chapter. That goes to national. That's the fee they charge. They take by credit card, check, whatever you like, as part of that. But that fee also has to be submitted by the deadline. So, I personally mailed a check, so I needed to make sure that was in the mail ahead of, we didn't want to chance anything, several weeks ahead of the deadline, to make sure that was received, and then followed up with the committee as well to make sure they got it. So a few general application tips: definitely follow instructions. There's a lot of nitty gritty here, and they specifically state, if it's close between applicants, they're going to go with the one that really stuck closer to the instructions. And little typos and things, editing, is very important. They explicitly state the quality of what you've done is far superior to quantity, or your longevity. While we talked about experience is important, and they want to see at least 15 years of your experience in AICP, that's not necessarily the end all be all. They want to see how expansive and outstanding, so to speak, that work's been. Defining the role and specific plans and projects. Don't just list them, highlight those, state exactly what the nominee had to do as a part of those plans or projects and how they influenced them and brought them along. Demonstrating connections to APA and how you've advanced the planning profession. Make sure that, and again, this is a big part of our role, seeking assistance. Having gone through this process, I have, Rich has, Mike has, and Mark, obviously, we have an idea of what helps this be successful and what kind of bumps in the road you'll hit. Make sure concrete examples are in there. Obviously, accuracy and completeness. They ask for some pretty specific info and dates. So, making sure that all of that is accurate. Telling the story, be compelling. And obviously, most importantly, with your page limitations, just be succinct and to the point. I'm guilty of flowery language frequently, but, needing to make sure that you're just being very succinct. Letters of support tips, and this is a big one, and I think probably one of the larger undertakings next to the endorsement letter, because you need to be coordinating this, obviously, with everyone that you're asking for letters. Number one, definitely request more letters than you need. Some people at last minute might not have the time to fill it, to finish it, or to get it to you. Some may be a lot stronger than others. So you give yourself the opportunity to kind of weed through and pick the ones that are the most compelling. I show this example. This is the example of what I sent to everyone I was asking letters from for John. And I did this because I wanted to make sure, one, there was no confusion in who it's addressed to. There's no confusion about what he was being nominated for. And I, to simplify things, just copied right in there the primary criteria they were looking for. So it was right there immediately in this draft letter for the writers to be able to speak to. And another thing is making sure you're asking for specific projects and topic references.
Yes.
Yes. So making sure that, for example, Honeyay Falls was one that I reached out to. John helped them develop their first ever comprehensive plan. And then we had several follow-on opportunities and actions with them, from tactile urbanism to codes to all these other things. So specifically asking him to put the narrative to that and what John's specific role was as part of that process really helped make the letter obviously a lot stronger. And the last thing I want to piece together, because again, this is, you know, something that you may not initially be aware of jumping into the application, you do need to know and be able to define those relationships. They ask you for and require that table. So it's one page, and it's a lot to try to squeeze on one page, especially if you're putting in 10 letters. But you need to have, you know, the author's name, title, all of that. You need to be able to give the specifics of their history and relationship, the dates in which they've been engaged, and then make sure you give the relevance, so the perspective of the letter, and reference the page number in the application. So I bring that up because, you know, it's helpful to think about this as you're creating your list of who to request letters of support from. Mark?
Thanks, Molly. Very different than letters of support for a grant application. No more letters for this nomination. So just to go over some of the roles of the nominee, you know, nominee, the person similar to Molly, who is the shepherd of the nomination. It could be yourself, or it could be somebody else that's helping out. The chapter may sign the nominee, you know, on the form and provide the endorsement letter, but each nomination needs a shepherd. And that's what we're going to talk about here. You know, they may help, if you're going to be the nominee yourself, or the nominator, you're going to self-nominate. These are all things to consider. If you're going to have help, also, these are things to consider. You're going to need more, you're going to need a lot of time. So allow time to start planning now for that August deadline. It's herding cats is what planners do, but getting letters of support, custom letters of support, are not going to be on anybody's top priority list in their day-to-day. So allow plenty of time for that. You know, you need to, or the person helping you needs to really take some time to organize the materials. I assisted with writing the endorsement letters myself for the 2020 FAICP inductions that were supported by the chapter, and it was the most challenging writing assignment of my life to be able to distill somebody's career to 3 pages. So taking time to carefully prepare the materials and review the materials and write succinctly is extremely important. Right before the nomination goes into national, you know, it says you need to secure a nomination letter from the chapter. It's really going to be the responsibility of, if you're going to self-nominate you, or if you're getting help, the person nominating you, to draft that endorsement letter. We will, at the chapter level, if we are going to submit the nomination or sign the nominator line, review that letter for content, but we're not going to be the ones responsible for drafting that nomination letter. Hopefully, with our experience, if we note anything that's amiss or missing from that nomination letter, we'll give you that feedback to help you make the endorsement letter possible. So the endorsement letter, we need all this stuff from you. I'm sure we're throwing a lot of stuff at you. Your nomination categories and defense for each. In the endorsement letter, you need to really be succinct in summarizing that. And Molly did point out the challenges of selecting more than one category. If you select 5 categories, there's just not going to be enough space in your 3-page limit to write what you need to write to support your nomination, even in summary, in that 3 pages. So, you know, again, encouraging you to select 1 or 2 categories. Your 10-page annotated resume. I know we all have the 10-page annotated resume, you know, right on our C drive on our computers.
Sure.
That is a considerable amount of work to go back to your career and develop that. And your top 5 achievements in your career. You know, some Friday night, you might want to have a couple drinks and think back over the course of your career to identify the things you're the most proud of, and that you can get others to write about for your nomination. With that, I'll turn it back over to Richard to talk about how we can help you.
Okay, thanks, Mark. There's a lot there. If I go back to what Mark just said, the things that we need, if you focus as you're preparing this, as you focusing on your annotated resume, obviously, which is going to have those projects that are important. It's going to have your top 5. It's going to tell you who you're going to want to get support letters from. And if you do all this in a timely manner, not quite the procrastination action chart that Molly showed, that last nomination letter should kind of fall into place, because what you're trying to do is you're wanting the nominator, the president of this chapter that signs the letter, to be highlighting those things that are in there so that they read the nomination letter and go, oh, this is great. And then when they open up the package, that's really what they find. So there's a lot of work and thought. I like the idea of having a beer with yourself and going over some of these things a few nights in a row. So big thing, how can we help? While we're not going to write the application for you, we are a resource. We won't write it, but I think Mark was the one that also said you don't have to be a narcissist to do this, to apply for FAICP. On the other hand, we know that most planners don't promote themselves very well. Oh, I'm a good planner, yes. I've done some good projects. I liked it. No. You don't need the flowery words, but you do know how to say it right and promote yourself. As a committee, Molly's had some experience with this. Mike's had some experience. We will help you promote yourself. You're going to have to write it, but to the degree you want us to, we'll review it and we'll add comments that will make sure that it is self-promoting, because that's what you need. We will help as an advisory committee. Our role will help you almost as much or as little as you want. We're here, call us. We're here to, ask us questions. But our role in this whole thing, from a facilitation standpoint, we have organized the call for nominees. This is part of it. We're trying to get people to think about this and say they would like to be a nominee. We have established a schedule that will hopefully prevent the procrastination action phenomena that Molly pointed out. There will be a schedule. You'll see a brief version of it in a moment, but it will be online, and we are set up to give you notices of reminder. You need to have sent out your request for support letters by this Friday so that you can get them back by July 15th or whenever the date is. So we will help you with that. And then there'll be a reminder, follow up with your letter of your supporters to make sure they're on track. So we'll help you with that. We don't do it, but we'll be there to kind of, nudge you forward. So we'll keep you on schedule by keeping you aware of the deadlines. We have been trying to put together potential mentors. We'll pair you with people on the committee to help review and advise as you move forward. We have some people that have FAICP members that have agreed to be mentors. If that's what you want, then they can work with you as well. We will advise you on the strength of your nomination. Again, we don't write it, but we'll review it. We'll provide comments and suggestions, and we'll look at the final package if you want to see that it's packaged appropriately. I suspect that unless we see something really outrageous, we're not going to be looking at whether you've got an inch or an inch and a quarter margin. Well, we'll be looking at the content, but also, the presentation itself. But the little details will still be up to the applicant. So with that, we're to the timeline, and I think, is this Molly, back to you?
Judy.
Or
yeah,
me?
this is Judy.
Yep.
No, they see I hope everyone looks at this timeline and maybe print it out and keep that with you at all times. This is sort of the benchmarks that you're looking at. Can I pull this together on this particular date? We're going to be here. We're going to give you a hand. And as Richard said, we're going to be your reminder. You may get an email from one of us 2 weeks before, say, the May 14th deadline saying, okay, where are you? Do you need help? Can we give you any suggestions? But the timeline is basically, it's for us so that we as a committee can help you best. And again, we're volunteering our time to help you. And we hope this timeline will help you and give you, at least a leg up on the process. Next slide. Okay. I think this is back to Mark.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you for reminding me that this is my Well, that's it. These slides, the slide deck will be available on our FAICP resource page, which you can see on this slide here. The recording will be sent to and available on the page as well. Again, we're here as a resource. I think the collective experience of the committee members will help candidates. Please be aware of that February 26th internal deadline to get us some information. Information on that process is posted on the website. We're a volunteer committee, so our capacity is a little bit limited in terms of the number of people that we can meaningfully assist in their nomination process this go around. So we really want to see through that nomination submission on February 26th to the chapter, the members that are interested, their potential qualifications, to really help us gauge, the number of people we can directly assist with this nomination process for this current cycle. If we're not able to assist you in this current cycle, we're more than happy to work with you in future cycles. Again, we want, I wanted to, as the chapter president, wanted to institutionalize a committee, a standing committee to assist our members through what can be a very daunting process to pull together a nomination for FAICP. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions that folks have.
Did we get any typed in?
Nobody's typed any questions.
Okay.
I think so. I think maybe it's worth just reiterating too, but before we give anybody the chance to bring in their questions. So, if you're unclear in terms of this next step of what to happen, because I know we did go over quite a lot of material and, we're trying to give you the holistic view of the process, but also where we can kind of come in at some of these junctions. That deadline that Mark talked about, what we're asking you to give to us, is your resume, as close to your 10-page annotated resume as possible, and just your top 5 achievements. So, and that's going to help us get in a position where we can, recommend you as candidates to the board, and then, begin the process of the piecing the application together with you.
Yeah, if I could add to that, Molly, on the resume, Molly said as close to your annotated resume as possible. We're not necessarily looking for the full detailed formatted according to FAICP guidelines. We're looking for enough for us to look at our applicants, evaluate, assist and guide you and guide us. So if it isn't a full annotated resume, it's just a standard resume but it's got the projects on it, that helps. So
yeah, just to help us get to know you, if we don't already.
Right.
So we did have a couple questions come in. And Nan Stolzenberg asked, can you explain the February 26th nomination to the chapter a bit more? So, and I'm also going to paste into the chat the the post on the chapter's website with the call for nominations that describes that February 26th process a bit more. Molly just described it, but I posted the link to that post on our website with the information about how you can submit that information directly to us. Nina Peak asked about how many candidates is the chapter looking to support. That's a very good question, and it's something the committee will assess once we see the level of interest from our members. Ted had a question. I have a few questions, maybe easier to unmute. Oh, if we start unmuting Ted, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to risk it.
Okay.
Find Ted and unmute him. All right, Ted, you're live.
Now I am.
Yes.
There you go.
Mark. And thanks for setting up this committee. I think that was a very wise step. I was wondering. No, I know Mark. I know Molly a little, but really, I haven't done anything upstate. And I don't know if it makes more sense to go in through Metro chapter or not. But I'm fine. I think it would be good to come in through upstate, but I'll talk to some people and see if it makes more sense to do Metro. The 10-page resume, obviously that requires an enormous amount of detail. I mean, my long resume is 3 pages, and it lists almost everything. So I guess I'll look on the website and see how they want everything presented.
Well,
Go ahead, Molly.
I can just say, Ted, if I can give you a little bit on that, having spent a lot of time looking at the nomination guidelines, sort of as the Bible, they really don't give you any specifics of, like, this is the information we want to see on there. But, I can say, and this might be something as we go through, and if you'd like to kind of work with us, we can give you sort of some examples about how we've addressed some of these things. But, obviously education and work experience. But the big thing I think they're looking for is, like we said before, some of your projects throughout your career, and using that as an opportunity to narrate your specific role in those, because, all of the letters and things, obviously being so page limited, you really can't get into some of the minute details. So I'd really recommend that be kind of a big piece. Obviously, another good place to list awards, publications, anything like that, presentations, anything like that you've helped kind of work, any volunteer work, whether you're on local boards and commissions, whether you've served on any APA boards or committees, all of those things are fair game, and I think would really help strengthen that resume. So that's something, again, that we're here for. We can help you kind of narrow down and figure out what are the big pieces that could and should be on that resume.
I have John's resume called up if you want to.
Let me, if I could also add to what Molly said. I agree with everything she said. Let's go back to the upstate versus Metro.
Yeah.
At least technically, theoretically, it should not make any difference which chapter you go through to get nominated. I know when I went through this process, I had letters of support from several different states where projects that I had worked on were not in Florida, where I was ultimately nominated. So, you call your letter of support if you are a strong candidate. We look at your resume, and we can support you. We would support you wholeheartedly, even if all your work were done in Pennsylvania, but you're now here. So it's your resume. In terms of the annotated resume versus a regular resume, one way to think about this is, keep in mind they're looking for your top 5 big projects or 10 big projects. Think of it this way. If you are going after a job, you give them your resume to get in the door, you have the interview, and they might ask you about, tell me about this comprehensive plan that you did in such and such a city. What would you tell them? When this goes to national to be reviewed, those are the kind of questions they would ask, but you're not there. So you have to fill in that I was the project manager of that. It was the first comprehensive plan they'd ever done in that community. We followed it up with this and that, and it won 4 awards. It's that kind of stuff that you really need to, that's your annotation.
I just want to know, I'm looking at this and I know this is the draft that I had sent and I was working on with Mark. I'm like, there is information on here that's not, it's missing things, and I noticed those question marks, which was the first alarm to me. I'm like, I know that was not in the submittal. So
while Richard was talking, I was doing a slow scroll, so you can kind of get a sense of, you know, the different categories.
No, actually,
yeah, okay.
If that's Molly, it's a very attractive look.
Yeah, and I'm happy, you know, again, you know, if we have 5 or plus, or I mean, you know, however many people were advancing, it may become a little difficult, but I am happy to help with some people if you don't have, you know, your own team or individuals who are comfortable with any design-based things. I'm certainly happy to help piece some of that together. You know, but obviously that's where our timeline comes in, is giving us ample time to help you with that and piece it together. So, you know, and like I said, that draft is actually a good example. That was really sort of the brain dump of literally everything, you know, and then kind of going through and figuring out how you can call that down. So, you know, question marks and all, I think maybe that's a good example.
So here's just another example. I'm sure Mike wouldn't mind sharing it. It's not as polished as the one that Molly put together for John's nomination, but still, this one was effective also. But again, you know, similar format, you know, just a summary of, you know, what you've done, where you've done, you know, snapshots. You know, Mike included some pictures of the projects in his annotated resume, but this represents a different but still successful approach to that, to tackling that 10-page annotated resume.
Now, now here images are permitted, or that was a change, that there's no images?
So they don't explicitly say. The only absolute no on images is any picture that shows the actual nominee. Okay. So you are allowed to have some pictures to utilize this, but basically they just make you aware that it affects obviously your page limitation, and you know, they generally make the statement that it's not really something they're going to take into consideration, so to speak. I mean, and like I said, it obviously helps with some visual representation, but
I think, Molly or Ted, in terms of, I was looking at some of the pictures that Mike put in. I used images back years ago when I did this. I think because they're not, well, they're kind of discouraging images. They're not saying you can't. So if you're going to use images, the image I would recommend is that it should literally be an image where the picture is worth at least 1,000 words, and that shortens up your discussion on it, but they can see from the image, great project. So it's got to tell something, not just be a pretty picture. So
I see 2 questions in the Q&A too. One was again asking sort of explaining the February 26th, and one was sort of a follow-up on whether or not we view the materials that are due on the 26th as the initial screening. And I would kind of say yes. You know, again, we're not asking you for the final anything, for polished anything then. It's just to give us an opportunity to get to know you a little more, your experience, your background, and kind of your thoughts on what your path looks like moving forward, you know, what you're thinking in terms of nomination categories.
And part of it is literally to get you thinking about it by February 26th, not July 1st.
Right.
You got to start thinking about it, because in your head, things will change. And as like Molly said, oops, 1-inch margins. You know, I just lost a page worth of text. What do I cut? You got to start thinking about it earlier, and earlier the better.
Right, and also lets us know if you can meet a deadline, which is great. Great to
That
know.
true? That too?
There's
Yeah.
also a question that looks like in the chat that says, what is the role of FAICP after induction? And it says service, question mark. I'm not sure.
So, I mean, I'll let Richard take this
Yeah.
one. No, there's no definitive criteria, but Rich, do you want to talk a little bit?
Yeah, there isn't officially criteria. However, you're strongly encouraged, for example, Mark, to do the kind of thing I'm doing. Help. You become mentor to other planners. It's easier when you're not retired, but it's to continue to promote the profession. There are committees at the national level of FAICP people, and you would attend some of their sessions if you go to the national conferences or chat online, but it's more service to the profession and fellow members. That's what it's about.
Looks like Pat has a question, so I'm going to unmute you, Pat.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, thank you, Mark, and the members of the committee. I think I know everybody on the committee with the exception of Molly, but I certainly have heard a lot about you. So I'm glad to see the group that has put forth the time and effort to do this. Is pretty important. I asked the question I wanted to ask is I've had a long career in the business of planning, probably eclipsing 40 years. And if I think about doing some quiet time and thinking about what I've done, what I've been involved in, and I think about the front end of my career and some of the projects that I did or worked on, and the people I worked with, sadly to say, those people aren't walking the earth anymore. And I wish they were, because we could have some great chats about whether the plan worked out as we thought it to be, or, what would we have done different. But I think, some of the folks who may be applying, myself included, when you think about, we're talking about a life's work here, and when it's a long time, there may be folks who really know my name on a document or know my name in a report, but really don't know much about me. And I wish, you think about using that community or that particular project, and you can see how it evolved over time. I think there's a little bit of a dilemma in getting a sort of a fair representation of commentary that covers the lifetime of work. So I don't know, this isn't really a question, it's more like commentary about either guidance from the committee about how to kind of bridge work done early in your career versus work done, towards the end of your career. So I would take any comments from the committee as to your perception on that and how that sort of relates to what we would put forth in our either annotated resume or the selection of, the criteria. So I didn't want to make this any longer than necessary, but I am interested in that point, your points on that.
I think, and I'll just give you, really the only thing I can offer is sort of my experience and John's application. But, one of the things that I did was to kind of, we did the whole brain dump essentially of his whole career. And as you could see, it was just a listing. And then basically going through and kind of pulling out some big wins or big, good projects that had great impacts from the beginning of his career through the middle, towards the end. So what I wanted to make sure was I wasn't just highlighting the last 5-10 years. I wanted to, take a look and kind of show the story, if you know, as one of those previous recommendations or tips, show the story of his development and the development of his impact over time. And also that was done, he, was fortunate enough to have a few examples of communities that he worked with that started, it was over a 10, 12-year period that started with one thing that went to this next thing and this next thing, and, really showed the ball rolling down the hill, so to speak, in terms of the progress that he helped make and the real change that he helped affect into the community. So, that's again one thing that I would recommend, and certainly I'm not, the greatest mind on this group, particularly with that perspective. But, I think that's our role, is to help you identify what those key projects are, how you best show the development of your career and your contributions over time.
And it also, I think, may point, because I was not in that situation, but it may point to the need for some research that maybe, as Judy was saying, the mayor is no longer alive, but there's still somebody, a city clerk, or even somebody that started, or even a newspaper that has articles about things, and then building upon it. If it was something that has longevity, so it's outlasted more than 1 or 2 or 3 administrations. Again, that's all I can help with is that's why you need to start thinking early, because it may take some research to dig up some of that stuff, that support background.
And that's a good thing too with the letters of support. I wanted to, and I mean, it was successful. I don't know if this is the reason why or anything, but pulling letters that are people, there were some that essentially, worked with John and oversaw him in some capacity and early on in his career, and spoke to, and they had, almost the entire perspective of his career to speak to, and seeing how that developed. There were colleagues and peers. We asked for clients, and even some people directly impacted by what we've done, whether it's, people who are a citizen who was a part of the committee, or was a part of the planning board or something that really helped to realize and see the impact of what was done. So that broad range of perspectives, certainly it can be challenging tracking down some of those individuals over time, but a broad representation from different perspectives, I think, is definitely very helpful.
Yeah, and part of that, those perspectives can also be, like I said, people you work with, people you work for. I'm using people in a broad sense. People you were mentored by, people that you mentored. She taught me everything I know, and since then I've gone on to do these. I wouldn't have been able to do it if it hadn't been for that guidance that Judy gave me the first 10 years of my career. Broad perspective across, different sources.
It does take that glass of wine and kind of digging through everything in your history and who is there that you can find, but it is a fair amount of work, but the people are out there.
Yeah.
Well, do we have any more questions? Oh, John, well, it's a statement. Why are you all so awesome? Have a nice weekend. Well, thank you, John. I think, as we've said before, as planners, we have a hard time patting ourselves on the back. And this is a task that requires that. It also requires a depth of perspective on your own career. And we're also not the best at self-reflection. So, that first step is self-reflection and figuring out, what can you demonstrate in terms of your contributions to the profession. We are all confident that we have many members deserving of this recognition. And we do hope that and encourage, our qualified members to submit their interest by February 26th. Are there any other comments or questions? Hearing none, we look forward to working with some of you on your nominations. And the materials will be posted on the chapter's website, and the recording of this session will be too. Thanks again, and have a great weekend, folks.
Thank you, Mark.
Bye.
Thank you, Molly, for putting this together.
No problem. My pleasure.